Hi there, Paul, Zuva said into the air, her voice rusty and cracked from not having spoken for a long time. Zefunde, the boy responded. He knew it was the beginning of a story, yet he did not want to hear it. He shifted, but a sharp pain struck his ankle, and he whimpered inwardly. There was no escaping this woman. Let me tell you the story of a girl who was abandoned in the forest, Zuva began. In a faraway land, there resided a prince who was destined to become king when his father died. The prince fell in love with a servant girl who used to warm his bath water. The prince had not intended to fall in love with her, but yet he did. Every early morning, when she brought him water, he would watch her pour the bucketfuls of water into the tub, then test the water with a finger before she bowed down, and in an almost inaudible voice, she would say, "Your bath water is ready, sir." She would do all this with her eyes downcast, never once looking into his direction, and always he wondered what he would see in her eyes if she looked up, but she never did. For moons upon moons, he watched this mysterious girl perform these mundane activities, and he was fascinated. Despite his attempt at conversations or his jovial greetings to her every morning, she did not change her responses, always bowing before him before she would respond, "Yes, sir," or "No, sir." And always, when he saw her, his heart would stir and a longing would wash over him. He would curse his heritage, his primogeniture, and long to be a commoner so that he could speak to the girl freely. He became so taken by her that she became the highlight of his everyday. When he would wake up in the mornings, his heart would fill with joy and gladness because he knew he would see her. He knew exactly the time she would come, as soon as the sun rose and its first ray slanted into his heart. Then he would listen for her footsteps, light like a deer's, yet brisk and businesslike. Then a light knock would follow, and at his bidding she would enter the hut with 2 steaming buckets of water. When one morning he heard a slower pounding gait walking to his hut, followed by a loud rap on the door and an older woman coming in with buckets of water, his heart sank, and not responding to the woman's greetings, he had asked brusquely, "Where is the maidservant who always brings water?" "She's not feeling well today, my sir," the older woman had replied, "so I stepped in for her. She will be back when she feels better." The prince's heart was torn. He did not want this old woman. He wanted the girl, his girl. So when the old maidservant had poured in water and told the prince the bath was ready, the prince had dipped a toe and screamed, "You want to scald me? Huh? You want to kill me, old woman?" He had screamed out loud. "You want the kingship to end with my death?" The old woman had stood trembling in one corner, not knowing what to say. Harming the prince was similar to harming the king. It was a serious offense and would be seen as treasonous. I am sorry, my prince," she said. Let me bring some cold water to dilute the water to your preference." "No," said the prince. "I do not want to see you here, woman. Get out of my presence. Go and call the girl here. I do not care if she is to come crawling or on your deathbed, but if you do not bring her here, know in advance that my father will be made aware of your treasonous act, and you shall be dealt with accordingly." The old woman brought back the girl, whose face looked so pale and lacked any glow. The prince dismissed the old woman, who scurried out as quickly as she could. Laboriously, the girl diluted the waters, and when she had tasted it with her finger, she mumbled, "Your bath water is ready, sir." But the prince did not immediately get into the water, instead walking over to the girl and lifting her chin with his index finger. He was startled when their eyes met. Hers were large and round, and a dark brown with speckles inside them. They transformed her face and made her face look like a doll's, like a creation rather than a real human being. He had wanted to ask her what had made her sick, but he was lost in the eyes, and he forgot everything else. Without thinking much, he carried her to his bed and stripped off the maidservant skins that she wore. There he lay with her. She did not fight with him. She had no strength, and besides, he was the prince. After he was done, he instructed her to clean up, weigh her skins, and leave. It became a routine for him. Every morning he waited for her, and after she had poured the waters and tested it with her fingers, she would say, your bath water is ready, say. He would lead her to the bed, strip off her skins, and lay with her, and always she did not protest. One such morning, the king's chief adviser had rapped lightly on the door, then without waiting for her response, barged into the prince's hut. When the adviser, Jere, had seen the scene before him, the maid-servant lying there on the bed, and the prince hastily tying his skins, the older man had quickly turned his countenance, and staring at the door, stated the purpose of his visit. "My prince," he had said, "your father requests your presence at the dare as soon as you are done with your ablutions." And he had left. Jere's heart had tore at the sight of the young girl in the prince's heart. She was the daughter of a widow, and their family was so poor they had begged the king's council to take in the girl as a servant so she could help her family out with her earnings. And now, here she was, serving the prince in so many ways than one. Jere also knew that as the chief adviser, he had a duty to warn the prince not to sow his royal seed anyhow, as this would affect his crown in the future. But the adviser also knew how petty the boy was. He remembered he had had a playmate sentenced for coming to play late, and how once he had accused an aide of stealing, which had led to the aide's beheading. The adviser also knew that if he dared say anything about sowing seed, he might also find himself accused. For a while, the prince feared that the chief adviser would alert the king of what he had seen, but when the days and then weeks passed, and he had not been summoned to the king's diary to answer, the prince let out a sigh of relief and continued with his shenanigans. Then the maidservant became sick again, but this time whatever ailed her seemed to take a strong hold over her. She vomited anything she ate. She could not bear the smell of even the everyday things like grass or cow dung. Her body was forever tired, and it began to take her longer to lug 2 pails of water to the prince's hut than she had ever done before. But that did not deter the prince. He continued his daily act before he bathed, and tired, she would acquiesce, waiting for him to finish so that she would go back to the servants' quarters and lay on her back until she would be called to attend someone else in the royal homestead again. The truth of the maidservant's illness did not take long to be revealed as her belly began to protrude underneath the skins she wore. At first, she tried to hide the shame by piling on skins upon skins, but the truth refused to be hid, and the belly popped unashamedly to the world. There was an uproar in the king's courtyard. A young woman, pregnant, unmarried. What abomination was this? So the maidservant was taken to the king's court, and a crying widowed mother was also brought forward. The 2 of them stood before the king, heads bowed in shame, while the rest of the kingdom sat behind them, watching the proceedings. "Young girl," the king said, his voice so powerful and commanding that both women shivered. "Young girl, you have shamed us as the people of Kara by falling pregnant without any cows being headed into your poor mother's craw. Now this court wishes to make amends and punish not just you, but the perpetrator too. In addition, the perpetrator will need to be called forward to pay ro'ora to your mother." The king paused so that his words would have an effect on the listeners. Then he asked, "Who is the father?" The maidservant said nothing. She did not even twitch. She might even have been a statue because she did not move. The king sighed. "Young woman, the court has other more important matters than your pregnancy to discuss. You have already disgraced your mother, but we are giving you an opportunity to make amends now. Now, who is the father?" The girl neither responded nor moved. The crowd's collective whispers grew louder, and so too did a few laughs arise. The king sighed again. "Young girl, I shall give you one last chance to respond. Who is the father? Say his name now, or point in his direction now. If you fail to do so, then the punishment for pregnancy out of wedlock will be meted on you and your mother. You will be banished from this village as your presence may lead to drought and strife, and your mother will pay 2 cows. I don't know from where, since she has none, but to the crown as punishment. Now," there was a greater authority in his voice now, "who is the father of your child?" The maidservant raised her face and looked fleetingly at the king before looking straight into the eyes of the prince who sat nonchalantly next to his father. For a moment, their eyes held each other in space before the prince quickly dropped his gaze and shifted in his seat uncomfortably. The maidservant then looked directly into the king's face, and he understood the import of her gaze. Like his son, he too shifted in his seat uncomfortably and knew he had to act before a scandal broke out in the kingdom. Very well then, the king said. His voice was no longer as commanding, and there was a touch of fear creeping into it. The girl was looking down again. Since you refused to speak about the father of your child, I proclaim the punishment of banishment upon you and of 2 fat cows upon your family. Know that you shall never set foot in this village again, and if you do, you will be beheaded. Your child too shall not be a part of the Gara kingdom, as you have not told us who the father is. And if in the future she ever enters the hallowed gates of the kingdom and claims to be Gara, she too will be beheaded. Understood? The girl said nothing, but her mother fell to the ground and pleaded with the king, her voice shrill and pained as though she were in a fire. "My lord, my king," she cried out, "please don't send my only daughter away. Please, what will I be with no child and with no husband? Please, kill us now, behead us. Rather I die here than lose the only person I have." But the crowd jeered above her cries. "You should have counseled your daughter better," they said. "A woman as old as you has failed to teach your daughter the ways of our people," others cried out. "You too are a disgrace to womanhood and to Gara. You should also be chased away," they called out. But the king's voice broke through Gara's voice. "People of Gara," it said, and everyone quieted. "Thank you for your impassioned cries. But I am the only king, and only I will have the final judgment as to what will happen to the girl and your mother." He clicked his finger into the air, and 2 aides and the chief advisor appeared. "Take the girl away. Blindfold her and lead her far into the forest so that she will not know where she is when the blindfold is removed. If she ever returns to Gara, then you will receive just punishments. Understood?" The men shouted in unison, "Yes, king." So the maidservant was blindfolded and led away, and she accepted everything without protest. "I am sorry, mother," were the last words she said as the 3 men hoisted her up and the crowd opened a path, jeering, watching the tiny procession disappear into the direction of the hills and forests. The maidservant had no idea for how long they had walked into the forest. She sensed the sun had set at some point as the crickets began to creak so loudly and the owls could be heard exchanging words. Her body ached from the baby she carried in her womb and from all the walking she was doing, but she dared not say a word to the man. She wanted water, she wanted food, but she said nothing. Just as she had done in her relations with the prince, she went along with the men and did not protest, not even once. It must have been the middle of the night when the strides of the men got slower and they started whispering amongst themselves. "I think we have gone far," one of them said. "We can leave her here." They left her sitting on some cold, hard ground, which felt like a rock, and she listened to their footsteps as they walked away. She sighed and wondered what was next for her and the kicking living being in her womb. Before she could even remove her blindfold, she heard the sound of footsteps again, and the hairs at the back of her neck rose. She wrenched the rag off, expecting to see a wild animal there, half hoping it would be, and it would finish her off quickly. But before her stood the chief advisor who had caught her and the prince laying together and who had been a part of the entourage that had carried her into the forest. She closed her eyes, half expecting a spear to slice through her neck, but nothing came, only his hurried footsteps growing closer. The advisor pressed a cold, heavy circular object into her hand, and in the dim light of the stars, the object winked at her. "What?" she wanted to ask, but he cut her off. I lied to the others that I dropped my spear here, he explained, then pointed to the circular object in your hand. That is real gold, he said. Ancient gold. The bangle was created by the earliest miners and is only owned by the king and the royal family in Gara. Those who want affiliation to the kingship in Gara will seek these bangles. So, you can sell this for a good price and find a home in a small village and live there peacefully with your child. Just lie that you are a widow and your husband's parents were making life difficult for you and you needed a fresh start. Tell them that your husband was wealthy and gave you the bangle and they will believe you. There are small villages nearby. Scout around and find one you can assimilate into. Good luck. Take care of yourself and the baby. He put his hand into the small bag he carried across the shoulder and retrieved a small keg of water, a small cake, and some dried nuts and fruits. He placed them on the maid servant's feet and he turned and disappeared into the darkness of the forest. The maidservant made herself comfortable on the leeward side of the rock, where she devoured the supplies left by the advisor and cried herself to sleep, willing a snake or a lion would bite her and she would die. But when morning came, she was alive and alone and cold. She had instead dreamt of her mother being devoured by a lion and a snake, and that only made her cry anew. She did not move from the leeward side of the rock for a long time, finding shelter there. She was grateful it was spring, as the days and the nights were warm and there was no rain. She made a fire, which she strove to keep burning to scare away the animals, but also tried to limit the amount of smoke so she would not attract human interest. In the afternoons, she gathered the new fruit that sprang from the trees and made traps for birds which she fried over her fire. A little brook ran nearby, and in the afternoons she filled the chief advisor's keg with water before dipping her bloated body in it. She tried not to think of her mother and how the poor woman would pay the 2 cows, because just thinking about it made her cry. She refused to think of the baby she was carrying and what would become of it. She blocked all thoughts of the prince from her mind. To him, she had been something to use, dispensable, a tool that had served its purpose. Now that she carried his seed, he had seen her banished, and the banishment had worked in his favor. She knew even now that when the child was born, she would never refer to it as a prince or a princess. It would just be another unfortunate poor child. The days passed and became weeks, then moons, and her stomach grew bigger and bigger. The inevitable was near. She would need to find somewhere to live, a village where her child would have a normal upbringing. So she began scouting. In the afternoons, she ventured from her rock and traveled to the edges of the forest, where she peered at villages and their villagers going through their daily lives. But she knew she had no courage to arrive as a pregnant stranger in any village and live a lie. A part of her was resigned to stay in the forest forever. But she did not want that existence for her child, and as she thought about it, a thought struck through her mind. She had seen an older woman from the village to the north venture further than others into the forest, into an ever-humid cove where she would fill her basket with mushroom. The woman reminded her of her mother, and even as she continued to sketch her plan in her mind, she prayed that the woman would be kind. The night the first rumble of thunder to signal summer echoed through an increasingly cloudy night. The maidservant's waters broke, and a sharp pain hit both her stomach and her back at once. She squatted by the leeward side of her rock and bit her lip, trying to grit the pain away, but it grew stronger and stronger. The thunder and lightning grew closer, and each time a boom sounded across the skies, it would reverberate through her body as though she too was connected to the sky. Then a deeper, sharper pain rocked her body, and for a moment she felt as if her soul was being wrenched out of the body. Then something whooshed out of her. She looked down. The baby was here, and as the little girl opened its mouth to cry, a big rain splatter fell across its brand new forehead, followed by others in quick succession as both the skies and the baby wept. Quickly, the maidservant cut off the cord that had connected the baby to her and swaddled the newborn in one of the many skins she had worn back home to cover her pregnancy. Holding the baby close, she retreated to the little shelter she had built, and there the newborn weathered its first storm. In the morning, the air was crisp and clear, and the vegetation looked fresh. The maidservant fed her newborn one last time and swaddled her even tighter. Inside the swaddle, she put in the golden bangle. Then, carrying the baby, she walked out of her shelter to the mushroom cove. She was there before the old woman arrived, as there were still big fat mushrooms that were begging to be picked. She carried the baby to the path and placed it there. Quickly, she went to hide behind a dense bush and washed. True to her routine, the old woman arrived, carrying a basket, her eyes narrowing with joy as she saw the thick mushrooms before her. But she kicked something soft in her path and screamed, dropping her basket full of fruits and mushroom. The baby, having been disturbed out of his slumber, opened its lungs and wailed. The old woman regained her composure and approached the swaddled parcel, peering into its face. Satisfied it was a baby, she bravely stooped down and picked it up, and the baby immediately quietened. "Where is your mother, little one?" she asked, even though she could tell the baby was no more than 2 days old and would not be able to respond. The old woman looked around the cove for any sign of the mother, while gently rocking the baby to silence in her left nook. There was no sign of any adult. There were 2 big footprints on the muddy edge of the cove, and she tried to follow them but could find no trail. She then sat by the entrance to the cove for over an hour waiting, hoping that the mother would soon materialize and claim her child, and still there was nothing. She sighed. An abandoned baby, and just her luck in finding it. She then picked a few mushrooms, packed them in her basket, and left for her village. In her hiding place, the maidservant breathed a sigh of relief. From afar, she followed the old woman, walking as stealthily as a cat, until the woman came to the edge of the forest and was swallowed by the village, together with the newborn baby hiding under her arm. The old woman, Buyataka, did not waste time in announcing the appearance of a strange baby in their midst. She had gone to leave a basket in her hut, then went to the king's dairy with the baby. An emergency court was set, and the horn sounded 5 times to alert villagers of the court. The yard was filled within minutes as men and women and children came to hear the story for themselves. The king gave Mbuyataka a podium, and she rose, still holding the baby in the nook of her arm. "My people," the old woman said, "today as I fetched for mushrooms in the cove, I heard a whimper from the ground, and when I went to investigate, I picked up this child." She raised the baby high up. "I searched for the mother around the cove, and there was no sign of her. I even waited, which is why I was late today, and still no one came to claim the child. My conscience would not allow me to leave this innocent child, so I brought her here. Thank you." The king nodded after the narration. Then he said, "Buyataka, you did a great thing as you demonstrated kindness for a defenseless baby today. However, you know our custom as this village is that we are skeptical of visitors, because if we do not know where they are from or what their intentions are, we may be blindsided by them, and this can leave our peaceful community in disarray. This child is a stranger, Mbuya." The old woman nodded. "I know, my king, but I also know that one of the precepts we have as a kingdom is that of kindness and doing good to each other. I could not leave a defenseless child in the forest where wild animals roam and the weather is changing for the west. If I had done that, it would have eaten me up. My king, my king, this child is barely a week old and he has no intentions of harming anyone. I think we should keep it. What if the child is bait and the parents are lurking somewhere in the forest and are getting ready to pounce on us, accusing us of stealing a baby? Or what if the baby is a bad spirit or bad omen sent to wreak havoc in the kingdom? The stakes are high in Buyataka." But the old woman refused to listen to any of the arguments raised by the king and his advisors and haggled to keep the baby. There is a reason why my ancestors led me to that space in the cove, and they intended for me to take care of this child. If you allow me, my king, I will look after her like my own." The king and his council went into deliberations as the old woman stood her ground and continued to hold and rock the baby. After a heated discussion where they threw hands into the air, the king came back with a verdict. "Mbuyataka," he said. The council was severely divided regarding the matter. "However, we have decided that you can keep the child. The crown has also said that it will help to provide in the upkeep of the child, and you will be welcome to approach the crown at any moment for assistance. However, should this child cause havoc in the village, may it be upon your head, and may you receive just punishment for those actions." Mbuyataka nodded. Back inside her heart, the old woman unswaddled the child, and as she did, the heavy gold bangle fell. Even as Mbuyataka lifted it from the floor, she knew that this was the real deal and would fetch a fortune for the owner. Then she wondered why someone with such an expensive artifact would abandon their child. She knew she could not take the bangle to the king, as this would raise even more suspicion. The bangle would have to be hidden somewhere safe. After bathing and feeding the child and swaddling her into better skins, she named the child Rashai, meaning lose something. Rashai grew up unaware of her heritage. Of course, she knew that Mbuyataka was not her mother, but Mbuya had told her that her mother had been an adopted daughter of hers. While their family was not the wealthiest family in the village, they were never hungry, and the benevolent king always sent some food their way. There were 2 other grandchildren in the family, Mosha and Revai, and the 3 of them became inseparable, working in the fields together, playing together, and doing chores around the house together. The year Rashai turned 12, Mosha was 15, and already his body was looking like that of a hard-working man. His shoulders had broadened, while his arms and calves were toned from working in the fields and hunting with the other boys and men in the forest. Revai was 13 and easily one of the prettiest girls in the village. By then, Mbuyataka had already grown old, and she could no longer go into the coves to fetch for the mushrooms that she would sell, so instead she sent her 2 granddaughters to do the job in her stead. That year, however, the land was hit by a severe drought that affected all kingdoms in the region. No rain fell, and the land turned different hues of brown and yellow, with the ever-billowing dust forever hiding the sun that it also turned brown. At first, people braved the drought and slaughtered off their already dying livestock and ate meat. But then the rivers and brooks began to dry too, and soon there was hardly any water left to drink. Braver families packed their belongings and locked their homesteads. "We will be back once the rains fall," they said, and left. Within weeks, however, more and more people began to leave, some families disappearing in the middle of the night without a goodbye, and others going from door to door bidding relations and neighbors farewell alike. Before long, the king too sounded his horn 5 times, and the trickle of villagers who had remained came to his courtyard, Rashai, Mosha, and Revai amongst them, having left Mbuya, who was too frail to come in the village and in her heart. "My people," the king said sadly. His face was gold as the tributes too had dwindled, and his voice had lost all its luster and command. Rashai thought he was going to cry. "I am sorry," he continued resigned. "I have tried to keep this kingdom together from the day I became king, but today the ancestors have deserted us and left us with this crippling heat, but no water." He sighed. "I feel like a coward standing before you today, but I too have a young family. If we stay here, we shall all die, which is why my family and I have decided to leave. We shall relinquish the title of kingship, and amongst those of you who remain, you can choose a new king." He sighed again. "It pains me to leave the land of my ancestors, but goodbye, my people." When they woke up the next day, the king and his family had departed, and as though people had been waiting for the king, the migration continued in droves. Rashai, Mosha, and Revai watched daily as their friends left and went to rummage in their homes and sheds for a remaining morsel, splitting the little food they found between themselves and Mbuya. They knew they could not leave. Leaving would mean that they would leave Mbuya alone, as they would not be able to carry her with them. So they stayed. They and the other families who were too old to walk the distances, and the children who no one thought would make the journey, and the sickly who were resigned to death and couldn't journey to places they knew they would certainly find death in. Every evening, as the three children sat by the fire, they would count the remaining villagers and families, from thousands, then hundreds, and then one day they counted 99 people. No one left after that. But the three of them were the strongest among those who remained. Every day, an elder would summon anyone amongst the three of them and would ask for a gulp of water or for a morsel of millet sadza. They gave what they could, but they too didn't have enough. "What should we do?" Rashai asked one night. "We have to help the others." "Yes," Mosha said. "It is not fair that we scout and eat while others are struggling." Revai sighed and said, "What do you propose we do?" she asked. "Imagine, we are struggling just to feed the four of us. How will we feed 99 people?" No one said a thing. Even Mosha, who had become quite the proficient hunter, knew that the animals had migrated too, and it was difficult to find even a rat in the forest. "We will have to try," Mosha said at last. "If we go to the brook very early in the morning, we will be able to dig for water, and then you girls can look for any roots or fruits in the forest, and I will bring any animal that I find." It was difficult work, digging for water from the dry brook and lugging it back home, but always the happy smiling faces that greeted them as people quenched their thirst was satisfying. They had lesser luck with the food, but they tried as much as they could. "Go further into the cove," Mbuya Taka told them as she slept on a reed mat beside the fire despite the sweltering heat. "You will find some fresh mushroom. It's always humid in there." The next day, the two girls ventured further into the cove. Yes, it was humid, but it was also very dark that they decided to hold each other's hands and venture as far as they could. Rashai found the place to be very eerie, and shivers continually raced down his spine. She continued to feel as though someone was watching her, but in the dark, it was difficult to decipher who it could be. When they finally emerged with baskets of mushrooms, Revai was giddy with joy, but Rashai calmed her down. "Wasn't that cove spooky for you?" Rashai asked. "Didn't you feel like someone was watching?" But Revai shook her head and laughed. "It's all in your mind. Quick, let's go home. Tonight people will have a feast. Let's go." Indeed, the rest of the villagers were happy with the spoils, and for the first time in a long time, laughter rang through the small crowd and people stayed up late, telling each other folk tales and reveling in the fullness of their stomachs. Rashai knew that she would have to return to the cove, even though the thought filled her with fear. But the next day, when they got to the cove, they found a roughly sewn bag by the mouth of the cove. In it were different dried fruits and nuts and a large chunk of some meat. Besides the bag were 2 baskets of mushrooms. At first the girls were excited, but the excitement lasted only a moment. "Who could it be?" Revai asked. "I told you there was someone watching me in the cove. I think they left this for us," Rashai responded. Revai peered into the cove and scratched her hand. "Who do you think it is?" "I don't know," Rashai said. "Probably someone who used to live in the village." Revai shrugged. "Perhaps," she said, then asked again, "Do you think the villagers will question where we got this food in the midst of all the hunger? Do you think that maybe they will refuse the food thinking it's bewitched?" "I don't know," Rashai responded. "If they refuse it, then it will mean more food for us at home." But they should not have worried what people would think, as nobody asked but devoured the succulent food before them. Only Mosha was fearful. "What if it's a trap? I don't trust this. I don't even trust the kindness of someone who gives away so much food during a drought. But having brought back only 3 bags, he too was hungry and joined the merry villagers in the meal. The next time they went to the cove, they found a bag of food and picked mushrooms again. The 2 girls called out, "Thank you," to the kind giver, and their voices echoed through the walls of the cove. No one had gotten sick or died from the first batch of food, so there was no reason to leave the food behind. The benevolent giver continued to provide food for them, and they took to shouting gracious thank yous to the kind person. And the once emaciated crowd of 99 began to look better, to laugh louder, and to interact with each other more. They grew closer, and without any defined leader amongst them, they began to see Rashai, Revai, and Mosha as their leaders. One afternoon, Mbuyataka's health took a turn for the worst. Revai volunteered to look after the old woman who was shaking and shivering, and told Rashai to go and collect the fruit alone. Rashai had forgotten her initial reservations about the cove, as she no longer felt the eeriness and spookiness because they never ventured further in now. But that afternoon, as she drew closer to the cove, she felt eyes on her again, and she began to shiver. A part of her wanted to bolt, but the bag of fruits and the basket full of mushrooms were within her reach. She decided to make a dash for it and bolt away from the cove, but her foot tripped and she fell. Before she knew it, a pair of hands was dragging her into the cove. She tried to scream, but a shaky voice echoed across the walls of the cove, and still the hands pulled her further and further inside. Once they were in a place so dark that even her eyes couldn't even see the dark, the hands let her go. She took deep breaths and sat up, her head banging on the walls. She could still feel the eyes staring at her, and she tentatively asked, "Who is there? Who are you? What do you want?" There was silence for a while. Then a woman's voice, sounding so hoarse like it had never been used before, said, "Hello, Rashai, the princess." Rashai said nothing, confused. The voice chuckled, then said, "My girl, the true leader of the Gara people, languishing hungry in the forest." The voice was silent for a while, but Rashai felt it was wise not to probe further. "Go home," the voice continued. "Find the golden bangle and journey back to the kingdom that longs for you as a ruler." "What are you talking about?" Rashai asked, finally, confused. "If you follow the great river eastward, you will find your people, your home, Kara, clamoring for a leader. Find the golden bangle. Your grandmother has it. Your grandmother hid it. Once you have it, go back home. The bangle will be the proof of your heritage, and it will symbolize your queendom." Rashai opened her mouth to speak and ask some more questions, but the voice cut her off. "Go home, ask your grandmother for the bangle, and go to your queendom." When Rashai asked more questions, the voice refused to speak. In the end, Rashai crawled out of the cove, carried the bag and the baskets, and with only the thoughts of the strange encounter in her head, she trudged home. She knew she'd have to ask Mbuyataka about the gold bangle. If Mbuyataka knew anything about the bangle, then perhaps the voice would have been right. But if Mbuyataka knew nothing about the bangle, she was not going to entertain the stranger's ramblings, and she would not return to the cove again. As she walked back home, she sensed the silence of the village, and she decided to walk faster, her heart beating even quicker. A billow of smoke was the first greeting she got as she got closer to the homestead. Then she could hear the wails being emitted from the compound. As she rushed forward, a 7-year-old frail girl rushed towards her and said, Sisi Rashai, Mbuyataka has passed away." The end. Zuva finished. The boy looked up at her, puzzled. "What about the golden bangle?" he asked. Zuva looked at the sky that was turning golden brown. "It's getting late, son," she said quietly. "Hop along home. Come back another day and I will tell you what happened next." The boy was disappointed, but he knew his parents would by now be frantic with worry. He stood on his one good leg, bade the woman he had always seen as a vicious and unstable person farewell, and hopped home. At the edge of the compound, he saw something on the ground and picked it up. A whistle. He put it to his lips and blew it, and its screech reverberated through Zuva, who immediately thought of teacher. The end. Thank you once again for coming to my channel. Thank you for listening and coming all the way to the end of the story. I know it was a bit long, but I appreciate you coming to the end. This Zuva series is quite a long series, and it will take us to places that I don't want to speak about here because I'll be giving away spoilers. So I want you to just stay tuned because I post every Saturday evening or every Saturday, wherever you are, you'll see this post every Saturday. I appreciate all of you that have come through and watched my videos. I appreciate you, those that have also subscribed. I appreciate those that have liked and commented, even those that just came and watched. I love you, all of you, and I appreciate all that. Have a good one and take care. Love you lots. Bye.